The moment my parents declared they'd rented out my bedroom to support the golden child, they forgot I saved the entire house. One calm question about the deed flipped the power and triggered irreversible consequences for them. 26 years old, and I finally stood up to my parents in a way that changed everything forever. It started this morning when I came downstairs for coffee before work. Mom and Dad were sitting at the kitchen table with these huge grins on their faces like they just won the lottery. Dad was holding some papers and Mom kept giggling like a teenager. Immediately, I knew something was up. "Sit down, honey," Mom said, patting the chair next to her. "We have wonderful news." I poured my coffee and sat down, already feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. In our house, wonderful news usually meant wonderful for Jake, my 24-year-old brother, and terrible for me. "We found a solution to Jake's money problems," Dad announced, spreading the papers out on the table. "We're renting out your room to this nice college student named Madison. She's paying $800 a month, and Jake really needs the money for his art supplies and that new studio space downtown." I stared at them. "You're renting out my room?" "Don't be dramatic," Mom waved her hand dismissively. "You barely use it anyway since you work such long hours. And Jake's art career is really taking off. His professor says he has real talent, and this gallery downtown is interested in his latest series." "Where exactly am I supposed to sleep?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "The basement's perfectly comfortable," Dad said. "We already moved some of your things down there. Jake helped carry the heavy stuff." Of course, Jake helped. Jake, who hasn't worked a real job in 3 years. Jake, who dropped out of college twice. Jake, whose art career consists of selling maybe 2 paintings a year at local coffee shops for $50 each. Jake, who I've been financially supporting along with my parents since I was 16 years old. I took a sip of my coffee and smiled. A real smile, not the fake one I usually wear when they announce their latest scheme to benefit their golden boy. "That's interesting," I said. "Before you finalize anything, you might want to check who actually owns this house." They both laughed. "What are you talking about?" Dad chuckled. "I've owned this house for 30 years. Bought it when your mother was pregnant with you." "Actually," I said, still smiling, "check the deed. I think you'll find some interesting information there." The laughter died. Dad's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean that 3 years ago when you couldn't make the mortgage payments and the bank was threatening foreclosure, I didn't just help you catch up. I bought the house. The deed is in my name. I own this house." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's mouth was literally hanging open. Dad was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "That's impossible," Mom whispered. "Check the deed," I repeated calmly. "It's all legal. I have copies in my room. Sorry, I mean in my house. To understand how we got to this point, I need to explain how messed up my family has always been. Growing up, Jake could do no wrong. When he was 5 and broke Mom's favorite crystal vase that belonged to her grandmother, it was because he was exploring his creativity. When I accidentally spilled grape juice on the white carpet at the same age, I was grounded for a week and had to pay for professional cleaning with my allowance. Jake got art lessons, piano lessons, soccer equipment, the latest video games, a new bike every couple of years. I got hand-me-downs from garage sales and lectures about being grateful. When Jake wanted to go to summer camp, the expensive one with horseback riding and sailing, they found a way to pay the $2,000 fee. When I wanted to join the debate team, they said we couldn't afford the $200 in tournament fees. The favoritism was so obvious that teachers and other parents would sometimes comment on it. Mrs. Henderson next door once pulled Mom aside after watching Jake get 3 new presents on a random Tuesday, while I got nothing, asking if everything was okay with me because I seemed withdrawn compared to Jake. Mom just laughed it off and said I was naturally quieter and didn't need as much attention. My 8th grade teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, called home once after I turned in an essay about feeling invisible. Mom told him I was just going through a phase and looking for attention. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the real insanity started when I turned 16 and got my first job at Peterson's grocery store. I was working 20 hours a week at $7.25 an hour, saving up for college, proud of my little bank account that had reached $800. I had dreams of studying computer science, maybe starting my own tech company someday. Then Dad sat me down for what he called a family talk. "Son," he said, "your mother and I have been thinking, Jake's got so much potential and we want to make sure he has every opportunity to succeed. You're doing so well with work and school, and we're proud of you for being so responsible." I remember feeling a warm glow at the rare praise. Finally, recognition for all my hard work.
Then came the punchline.
"We think it would be great if you could contribute to the household expenses. Nothing major, just help with the mortgage payment. It would really take the pressure off us financially and let us focus more on Jake's development. He's at such a crucial stage in his artistic journey." At 16, I didn't understand what was happening. I thought I was being mature and helpful, stepping up like a man. I agreed to give them $600 a month, nearly my entire paycheck after taxes. They said it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet financially. Dad had been having trouble at his construction job, and Mom's part-time work at the dental office wasn't bringing in much. That was 10 years ago. Over the years, my contributions steadily increased. When I graduated high school and started working full-time at the grocery store while taking community college classes, they asked for $800 a month. When I finished my associate's degree and got a better job as a junior accountant, they asked for $1,200. When I got promoted to senior accountant, they asked for $1,500. When I switched companies and got a raise, they asked for $1,800. The justifications were always the same, always centered around Jake. He needed new art supplies. The professional-grade paints and brushes were expensive. He needed a car to get to his art classes. He needed money for his studio apartment so he could have space to create. He needed to focus on his art without the distraction of a regular job. Always Jake, always his needs, always his dreams. Meanwhile, I was living like a monk. No social life because I was always working or exhausted from working. No dating because I couldn't afford to take anyone out to dinner or the movies. No hobbies because every spare dollar went to keeping my family afloat. I wore the same 5 shirts and 2 pairs of jeans for years. I drove a beat-up 1998 Honda Civic I bought for $800 that broke down constantly and brought peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to work every day while my CO workers went out for lunch at nice restaurants.
I lived in a constant state of exhaustion and resentment that I couldn't even acknowledge to myself.
Every time I felt angry about the unfairness, I'd push it down and remind myself that family comes first, that I was doing the right thing, that success would come eventually. The worst part was how they made me feel guilty for having any needs or wants of my own. When my car finally died completely, the transmission gave out in the middle of winter, I asked if I could skip 1 month's payment to buy a replacement. Mom cried, actual tears streaming down her face. "I just don't know how we'll manage without that money," she sobbed. "The mortgage is already so tight and Jake's art show is coming up. He needs $500 for the framing and display costs. If you can't help us this month, I don't know what we'll do." So, I took out a high-interest personal loan for $3,000 to buy another used car, and kept making my payments to them. Meanwhile, Jake got $500 for an art show where he sold exactly 0 paintings. When I asked if I could use one of the spare rooms as a home office so I could work on freelance accounting projects to make extra money, Dad said it wouldn't be fair to Jake because he needed creative space for his art. Never mind that Jake already had the entire 2-car garage converted into a studio, complete with professional lighting and ventilation that I had paid to install, plus the basement for storage of his canvases and supplies. When I suggested maybe Jake could get a part-time job, just something small to contribute to the household, they looked at me like I'd suggested he donate a kidney. "Jake's an artist," Mom said, her voice dripping with condescension. "His mind needs to be free to create. You wouldn't understand. You're more of a practical numbers person." The implication was clear. My dreams didn't matter because I wasn't creative enough to have dreams worth pursuing. I remember one particularly painful conversation when I was 23. I had been secretly saving up for months, skipping lunch and walking to work to save gas money because I wanted to take a vacation, just a small one. Maybe a weekend camping trip or a visit to a nearby city. I hadn't taken a single day off in 2 years. When I mentioned it casually at dinner, Jake laughed. "A vacation? Must be nice to have that kind of money to throw around." "I've been saving for months," I said quietly. "Maybe you should save that money for something more important," Mom chimed in. "Jake's been looking at this advanced painting workshop in California. It's only $1,500, but it could really help his career." I looked around the table, waiting for someone to say it was unfair, that I deserved a break too, that maybe Jake could find a way to pay for his own workshop. Nobody said anything, they just looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to offer up my vacation money for Jake's latest opportunity. I did. Of course I did. And Jake went to California for a week while I worked overtime to make up for the money I'd given them. 3 years ago, everything came to a head in the most devastating way possible. Dad called me at work crying, literally sobbing on the phone. I'd never heard him cry before, and it scared me. "We're going to lose everything," he choked out. "The bank is foreclosing. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. We've maxed out all our credit cards and we have nowhere to turn." I asked how much they needed to catch up. The answer made my stomach drop. $43,000. $43,000 to cover back payments, penalties, and fees. They'd been hiding the depth of their financial problems for months, apparently hoping Jake would sell some paintings or that Dad would find better work. I didn't have that much in savings. How could I, when most of my paycheck was going to them every month? But I had excellent credit from being so financially responsible, and my bank was willing to give me a personal loan for the full amount at a reasonable interest rate. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. Instead of just getting a loan to help them catch up on their existing mortgage, I talked to the bank about having them sell me the house directly and assume the mortgage entirely. The house was worth $180,000, and they owed $137,000 on the original mortgage. With my steady income and perfect credit history, the bank was more than happy to work with me. I didn't tell my parents exactly what I was doing. I just said I'd handle everything, that they didn't need to worry anymore. They were so relieved and grateful they didn't ask for details. Within 2 weeks, I had paid off their debt, assumed the mortgage payments, and had the deed legally transferred to my name. I owned the house free and clear. My plan at the time was to eventually transfer the deed back to them once they got financially stable and could take over the payments again. I figured maybe in a year or two, once Jake started earning some money and they could prove they wouldn't fall behind again. But stability never came. If anything, they got worse. With the pressure of possibly losing the house gone, they became even more reckless with money. Jake decided he needed a newer car for his image, and they co-signed for a $300 monthly payment. Mom started shopping more, buying expensive organic groceries and new furniture for the house. Dad bought a motorcycle he'd always wanted. And through it all, I kept paying the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, the property taxes, plus Jake's car payment when he inevitably couldn't afford it, plus the credit card bills when they overspent, plus the emergencies that came up every few months. I was essentially paying rent to live in a house I owned, while supporting 3 adults who treated me like a walking ATM. The breaking point came 6 months ago. I'd been dating Sarah, a wonderful woman I met at a professional development conference. She was a marketing manager at a tech startup, smart and funny, and everything I'd always hoped to find in a partner. She was the first person I'd felt comfortable bringing around my family, and I was really falling for her. We'd been together for 4 months when I invited her to our annual 4th of July barbecue. Sarah was excited to meet everyone, and I was nervous but hopeful. Maybe seeing me through someone else's eyes would help my parents realize I wasn't just their personal bank account, that I was a real person with my own life and dreams. The barbecue started well enough. Sarah charmed everyone with her questions about Dad's construction work and Mom's gardening. She genuinely seemed interested in their lives, which was more than most people bothered with. Then Jake started showing off his latest series of paintings, abstract landscapes that he'd been working on for months. Sarah was politely interested, asking thoughtful questions about his technique and inspiration. My parents were practically glowing with pride, hanging on every word of praise she offered. "These are really impressive," Sarah said, studying a particularly large canvas. "How long have you been painting?" "About 8 years, seriously," Jake said. "I went to art school for a while, but formal education just stifles creativity, you know. I'm mostly self-taught now." "That's amazing," Sarah replied. "Are you able to make a living from your art?" An awkward silence fell over the group. Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it's more about the artistic journey than the money. True art isn't about commercial success." "Of course," Sarah said diplomatically. "But everyone has bills to pay. Do you have another job to support yourself while you build your art career?" Jake laughed, but it sounded forced. "Not exactly. I'm lucky to have a family that believes in supporting artists. My brother helps out financially so I can focus on my work." Sarah looked confused. "Oh, are you 2 business partners?" "Not exactly," Jake said, glancing at me. "He just helps out because he makes more money than the rest of us. It's only fair since he doesn't have a family or anything." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah was looking at me with this expression I couldn't read: surprise, confusion, maybe pity. My parents were nodding along like Jake's explanation made perfect sense. "How generous," Sarah said carefully. "That must be a big help." "Oh, you have no idea," Mom jumped in. Jake's so talented, but art supplies are expensive, and he needs his own space to create. Plus, there's always something. Car repairs, rent for his studio, entry fees for shows. Thank goodness we have our responsible son to help out. I wanted to disappear. Sarah kept glancing at me, clearly trying to piece together what she was hearing. Conversation moved on, but I could see her processing everything, connecting dots I'd never wanted her to see. Later that evening, after Jake mentioned needing $1,200 for studio space downtown, Sarah pulled me aside. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "How much do you actually give your family?" I was mortified, but she deserved the truth. I told her everything. The monthly payments that now totaled $2,100, the emergency money for Jake that averaged another $500 to $800 per month, the car insurance I paid for everyone, the family cell phone plan, the groceries I bought every week, the utilities and repairs and property taxes. When I finished, Sarah was staring at me with wide eyes. "You pay for everything," she said slowly. "They're my family," I said weakly. "But what about your life, your goals? What about saving for our future?" That question hit harder than anything Jake had said. Our future. I was 26 years old, and I had no future. I had less than $3,000 in savings beyond what I needed for immediate expenses because everything else went to my family. I couldn't propose to Sarah because I couldn't afford a ring. I couldn't think about having kids because I couldn't afford to support them and my family. I couldn't even move out because I couldn't afford rent somewhere else on top of all my family obligations. I was trapped in a cycle that would never end, and for the first time, I could see it clearly through Sarah's eyes. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never really thought about it." Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm. "I need some time to think about all this." 2 weeks later she broke up with me. She was kind about it, but her message was clear. She couldn't build a life with someone who wasn't living his own life. She couldn't compete with a family that treated me like their personal bank account, and she couldn't respect someone who didn't respect himself enough to set boundaries. "I care about you," she said, "but I can't watch you sacrifice everything for people who don't appreciate what you're doing, and I can't build a future with someone who doesn't have any money or plans for his own future because he's supporting 3 adults who should be supporting themselves." That breakup was the wake-up call I needed. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my situation from the outside, and it was pathetic. I was a grown man living like a child, handing over my paycheck to mommy and daddy while they spent it on my brother's hobbies. That's when I started making my plan. I began documenting everything. Every payment I made, every dollar I spent on family expenses, every sacrifice I made that went unnoticed and unappreciated. I started taking screenshots of bank transfers, keeping receipts, recording conversations. I wanted a clear picture of exactly how much I'd been giving them over the years. The numbers were staggering. In the 3 years since I bought the house, I'd paid them over $85,000. In the 10 years since I started contributing to household expenses, the total was nearly $140,000. That didn't include the house purchase itself or all the extras, vacations I'd funded, emergency repairs I'd covered, Jake's art supplies and studio space. I'd essentially paid for a house and then paid rent to live in it while supporting 3 other adults. At the same time, I started researching my legal options as the homeowner. I consulted with a real estate attorney, learned about landlord-tenant laws, researched the process for evicting family members. I wanted to know exactly where I stood legally. Most importantly, I started setting boundaries. When Jake asked for money for art supplies, I said no. When Mom said they needed help with car repairs, I said I'd pay the mechanic directly but wouldn't give them cash. When Dad mentioned needing help with the electric bill, I told him Jake could get a job. They were shocked by my new attitude. They kept waiting for me to cave, to go back to being the reliable ATM they could count on. But I held firm. "But we're family," Mom said during one particularly heated conversation. "Family helps each other." "You're right," I said. "When do you plan to start helping me?" The question hung in the air. They had no answer because they'd never once considered that the help should go both ways. Which brings us back to this morning and their brilliant plan to rent out my room to support Jake's art career. After I told them to check the deed, Dad practically sprinted to the filing cabinet where they keep important documents. I could hear him rifling through papers, muttering under his breath. Mom just sat there staring at me like I was a complete stranger. "Here it is," Dad called from the living room. Then silence, long, heavy silence. He came back holding the deed, his face completely white. This says This says your name. That's right. But when? How? We never signed anything. I explained about the foreclosure 3 years ago, about the bank being willing to sell me the house directly instead of just helping them catch up on payments. I told them about assuming the mortgage, about having the deed transferred to my name. With every word, they looked more stunned. So, you've been paying the mortgage on your own house this whole time? Mom asked weakly. And utilities, insurance, property taxes, repairs, landscaping, and most of the food that goes in your mouths, I said cheerfully. Plus Jake's car payment, his art supplies, his studio rent, and about 1,000 other things over the years. Dad sank into his chair like his legs wouldn't hold him up anymore. Why didn't you tell us? When between Jake's emergencies, between being told I should be grateful to contribute to the family, between being asked to sacrifice more so Jake could chase his dreams without the burden of having a job. They had no answer for that either. So about this room rental, I continued, my voice still pleasant and calm. I'm afraid I can't allow strangers to live in my house without my permission. Don't worry about Jake's money problems. I have a solution. They looked hopeful for just a moment. You can all move out. The hope died instantly, replaced by shock and fear. Can't be serious, Mom whispered. I'm completely serious. Jake needs money. He can get a job like the rest of the world. You want to rent out a room? You can rent your own place and do whatever you want with it. This is my house, and I make the decisions about who lives here. But where would we go? Dad asked, his voice small and scared. I don't know. Figure it out. You've had me figuring out your problems for 10 years. Time to return the favor. Jake chose that moment to come downstairs, probably drawn by the sound of raised voices. He took one look at our faces and said, What's going on? Why does everyone look weird? Your brother owns the house, Mom said faintly. Jake laughed, a sound with no humor in it. What are you talking about? I handed him the deed and watched his face change as he read it. His confident smirk faded, replaced by confusion, then understanding, then fear. This is fake, he said finally, his voice shaking. This has to be fake. Call the county recorder's office, I suggested calmly. They'll confirm it. Or check online. Property records are public. The next few hours were a blur of chaos. Lots of shouting, lots of tears, lots of accusations flying in every direction. Jake called me selfish and heartless, screaming that I was destroying the family out of jealousy. Mom cried and said I was being cruel, that this wasn't how she raised me. Dad kept asking how I could do this to them, how I could turn my back on family. How could I do this to you? I repeated, my voice getting louder. I've been supporting all of you for a decade. I've paid for everything while you treated me like a second-class citizen in my own house. I've sacrificed my relationships, my future, my happiness to keep you comfortable. And your response when I'm finally successful enough to own something is to try to rent out my bedroom without even asking me. We thought it would help Jake, Mom sniffled. Help Jake. It would help Jake. When was the last time any of you asked what would help me? Silence. I'll tell you when. Never. Not once in 10 years has anyone in this family asked what I needed or wanted or dreamed about. You just assumed I existed to fund Jake's dreams while having none of my own. I'm a real artist, Jake shouted desperately. This is my calling. You can't understand because you're just a boring accountant. Then act like a real artist, I shot back. Real artists work to support their art. They don't live off their brothers for a decade while contributing nothing. Van Gogh worked. Monet worked. Every successful artist in history worked day jobs to support themselves. But you think you're too special to work. Jake's face went red. You're just jealous because I have talent and you don't. I'm jealous because you've had 10 years to pursue your dreams while I paid for the privilege of having none. That evening they tried a different approach. Mom made my favorite dinner. Pot roast with mashed potatoes and green beans. They all sat around the table like we were one big happy family, trying to pretend the morning's confrontation hadn't happened. They apologized for not appreciating me enough. They promised things would be different. They said they'd find a way to contribute more to household expenses. We've been thinking, Dad said carefully, cutting his meat with surgical precision. Maybe we could all chip in more for household expenses, make things more fair and balanced. Too late for that, I said, taking a bite of pot roast. It was delicious, which somehow made everything worse. I've made my decision. You have 60 days to find somewhere else to live. 60 days? Mom gasped, dropping her fork. That's not enough time. It's more notice than you gave me when you decided to rent out my room to a stranger. They tried everything over the following days. Guilt, anger, bargaining, more guilt. Jake even offered to get a job, as if working for 2 months could make up for 10 years of freeloading. I'll pay rent, he said desperately during one late-night confrontation. Whatever you think is fair, I'll make it work somehow. The fair thing is for you to live in your own place and pay your own rent to your own landlord. But we're family. Family doesn't take advantage of each other for 10 years and then act surprised when there are consequences. That was a week ago. They've spent the time alternating between trying to guilt me into changing my mind and frantically scrambling to find somewhere to live. Turns out, when you've been financially irresponsible for years and have no savings, it's incredibly difficult to qualify for a rental property. Dad came to me yesterday morning with a stack of apartment applications all stamped with big red denied marks. Please, he said, his voice breaking. We're desperate. Can't we work something out? I'll do anything. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who had raised me to believe that my only value was my ability to pay for things, who had never once in my adult life asked about my dreams or goals or happiness. Sure, I said. Here's the deal. You can stay, but there are conditions. His face lit up with hope. First, you pay rent. Market rate for a 3-bedroom house in this area is $2,800 a month. Split 3 ways, that's about $933 each per month. His face fell, but he nodded frantically. Second, Jake gets a full-time job within 30 days, or he moves out, regardless of whether you can make rent, but his art career can be a hobby like it is for millions of other people. Artists throughout history have worked day jobs. Vivian Maier was a nanny. T.S. Eliot worked at a bank. Philip Glass was a taxi driver and plumber. Even successful artists like Stephen King worked regular jobs before they could support themselves with their art. Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but just nodded. Third, you buy your own food, pay your own phone bills, handle your own emergencies. I'm not your backup plan anymore. I'm not your bank. I'm your landlord, and that's it. What about family helping family? What about it? You can help each other. Jake can help you make rent. You can help Jake buy groceries. Mom can help both of you budget. Leave me out of it. And if we agree to all this, then you can stay. But the very first time, you fall behind on rent or ask me for money or try to guilt me into supporting you, you're out immediately. No warnings, no second chances, no family meetings to work things out. I'll give you 30 days notice, and that's it. Dad was quiet for a long time. Those are pretty harsh terms. They are fair terms. I've been subsidizing your lives for 10 years. Now you get to live like adults. Can we have some time to think about it? You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the offer expires and you have 60 days to move out. They're meeting right now in Jake's room. I can hear their voices through the wall. Sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, always desperate. Jake keeps saying he can't possibly get a real job because it would kill his creativity. Mom keeps crying about how the family is falling apart. Dad keeps asking where they went wrong. I could tell them where they went wrong, but they wouldn't listen. They went wrong when they decided one child's dreams mattered more than the others. They went wrong when they turned me into their personal ATM instead of their son. They went wrong when they took my kindness for weakness and my sacrifice for stupidity. Honestly, I don't know if they'll take the deal. Jake getting a real job and keeping it, my parents actually budgeting and living within their means after years of financial irresponsibility. It seems impossible, but that's not my problem anymore. For the first time in my adult life, I feel genuinely free. I've started putting money into savings again. Real savings, not money earmarked for family emergencies. I'm looking at apartments for myself in nicer parts of town, thinking maybe it's time to live somewhere that's actually mine without having to share it with people who don't respect me. I've even started dating again. There's a woman named Emily who works in marketing at one of my clients' companies. She asked me out for coffee last week and I said yes. We have our 3rd date planned for this weekend, dinner at a restaurant I've always wanted to try but never felt like I could afford. I called Sarah last week, too, just to apologize and explain what had happened, what I'd learned about myself since our breakup. She was surprised to hear from me, but we had a good conversation. I'm seeing someone now, she said gently. But I wanted you to know I'm proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. It couldn't have been easy, she added. It was terrifying, I admitted, but also the most liberating thing I've ever done. I realize now that I wasn't ready for a real relationship before because I wasn't living my own life. That takes a lot of courage to admit. I just wish I'd figured it out sooner, before I lost you. Maybe we both needed to grow. I'm happy you're finally putting yourself first. Tomorrow morning, I'll know their decision. Either they'll agree to my terms and try to build a healthier family dynamic based on mutual respect and responsibility, or they'll reject the offer, and I'll spend the next 2 months watching them scramble to find somewhere else to live. Either way, I win. 2 months have passed since I gave my family the ultimatum, and honestly, I really thought they'd choose to move out rather than accept my terms. But they surprised me. The morning after their family meeting, Dad knocked on my door at 7 a.m. He looked like he hadn't slept all night. His hair was messy, his eyes were red, and he kept wringing his hands like he was nervous about a job interview. "We accept," he said quietly, "all of it. The rent, Jake getting a job, everything." I'll admit I was shocked. "Are you sure?" "Because once we sign a lease agreement, there's no going back to the old way." "We're sure," he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Jake's not happy about it, but he understands this is his only option. That afternoon we sat down and signed an actual lease. I had my lawyer draw it up. A proper rental agreement with all the standard protections for both landlord and tenant. They're paying $933 each per month, due on the 1st of every month. No exceptions, no family discounts, no "I'll get you next week" promises. The first month was rough, really rough. Jake threw what I can only describe as adult tantrums for the first 2 weeks. He'd stomp around the house slamming doors, muttering about how I was killing his art and destroying his soul. He applied to maybe 5 jobs total and got rejected from all of them because he had no work experience and a terrible attitude during interviews. Mom kept trying to negotiate with me on his behalf. Maybe he could do freelance graphic design, she suggested, or sell his art online. Does it have to be a traditional job? "It has to be a job that pays him enough to cover his share of rent and expenses," I replied. "I don't care what it is as long as it's legal and he can prove he's earning enough." Dad was the most adaptable, probably because he'd worked construction his whole life and understood the concept of earning your keep. He picked up some part-time handyman work pretty quickly, though at his age it wasn't easy. The breakthrough with Jake came when his 30-day deadline was 5 days away. He was starting to panic, finally realizing I was serious about kicking him out. He swallowed his pride and took a job at the big box store near the mall, stock clerk, $14 an hour, 40 hours a week. I've never seen someone more miserable about having a job. He complained constantly about how early he had to wake up, how tired he was, how his hands were getting rough from moving boxes. But you know what? He showed up every day, and his first paycheck was enough to cover his rent. "This is temporary," he told me while writing out his rent check, literally the first check he'd ever written in his life. "Just until I can get my art career off the ground properly." "That's fine," I said. "As long as you can pay rent, what you do with your free time is up to you." The dynamic in the house has changed completely. Instead of 3 people lounging around while I worked and paid for everything, everyone has somewhere to be during the day. Jake leaves for work at 6 a.m. Dad goes to his handyman jobs. Mom got a part-time position at a local boutique, something she actually seems to enjoy.